Good afternoon, everyone. Richard, thank you very much for your kind introduction. My name is Michael Talbot. As Richard said, I'm head of strategy for Zenzik. For those of you, impossible as it may be for me to imagine, who don't know what Zenzik is, formerly Meridian Mobility, changed our name at the beginning of May. And we are a not-for-profit, part government-funded entity that's here to do a couple of really important things. One, to drive collaboration across our world-leading testing and development capabilities for connected and autonomous vehicles. And secondly, to promote this great ecosystem globally beneath the Zenzik brand. So my role today is to manage quite a large panel. We've got quite a lot to cover today. We've got quite an exciting range of things to cover. Some of the big questions about future of mobility, some of the more unusual questions about the future of mobility that we're going to be exploring. So I'm very pleased to have a panel of most of the sectors and all of the talents and some of the senses, as we'll find through our discussion now. I have started a timer because I'm forecasting now that we're going to go a little bit over time. But we want to make sure there's room for everyone in the audience to have their say, but also to make sure that we've got enough time to cover the rich variety of what the panelists can cover. So without further ado, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves very briefly, probably more briefly than I've done myself, but there you go. And over to you, Sito.
Okay, my name is Sidor Zhang. I'm a vehicle designer specialized in interior design of passenger vehicle. I'm based in Barcelona, in Spain. I provide consultation services for clients around the world. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carl Bayliss. I work for Centrica. I'm responsible for looking after the mobility and home energy management portfolio and plans for Centrica as we move forward into a brave new world.
Hi, I'm Julian Turner, Chief Executive of the Westfield Technology Group. We manufacture autonomous pods, as well as some beautiful petrol, hybrid and electric cars.
Hi, Andreas Mavroudis. I work for Aviva. I lead on mobility for the Futures team, which is essentially a horizon scanning team, R&D, and essentially, from my perspective, mobility change deniers championing group. So we've got a huge challenge on our hands.
I'm Scott Witchells, Director of PBA Stantec. We're a global development and infrastructure consultancy. So my focus is on the planning and design of the communities and cities of the future. And a lot of that at the moment is talk around the smart cities agenda.
Good afternoon. My name is Richard Anderson. I'm an associate at Urbanista. We are a planning consultancy providing advice to developers in the main and some local authorities as well. I've worked in the sector in London predominantly for the past 20 years, also on the architectural side as well.
Hi, my name is Daniel. That's all. No. So what I do. So I'm a computer science PhD in computer science, a postdoc in urban planning and architecture, a merger too. I'm professor of urban informatics at CASP, King's College London, and department head at the R&D division of Nokia that is called Nokia Bell Labs in Cambridge.
Let's dive straight in. So I think the first topic would be the sites of the future. So with that in mind, I think we want to think about what vehicles, infrastructure, public transport, what they may look like in the future. So, Andreas, if I can start with you, you've developed a number of views of the future, sort of scenarios for individuals. Can you give us a little flavor of some of those? Yeah, staying over the senses.
I think in our role, where we're trying to sell a vision into an organisation so that we can further our investment and make the right choices in terms of where we invest our time and money. And transformation budgets to address the issues that are currently in front of us, i.e. energy consumption, environmental issues, health, etc., etc. You have to paint scenarios, and those scenarios are really based on real people's lives. So one of those that I usually bring up in the presentations is someone living in Edinburgh, for instance. He's woken up in the morning. Argument's sake, his name's Tom. His home, personal assistant, virtual assistant wakes him up. It's already put an autonomous vehicle to come to his house. This is 2040, by the way. Already booked an autonomous vehicle to come pick him up. And he's actually going to have a meeting in the next couple of hours in London. Now, getting from Edinburgh to London and making sure it's going to happen, he needs to find some other sources of mobility. So it takes him, this autonomous vehicle takes him to a Hyperloop or multimodal kind of hub, if you like. And that effectively takes him to London. He then walks part of the way. He may choose another mode of transport or get into a smaller shuttle or a shared vehicle, and that ultimately takes him to his destination. So those scenarios also have other aspects associated with them that we then paint the picture of. And they're relating to communication, retail funding, payment systems, that kind of thing. You know, once you get a crystal ball and you try to paint this picture to a 300-year-old insurance company, it's almost never going to happen. But the reality is the incremental steps to get there, i.e. the 10 years from now, the 20 years from now, are realities that we can see currently happening today, and they're much easier to paint those scenarios with.
Thanks so much, Andreas, and I think sort of some early gauntlet thrown down about some good innovative thinking going on in the insurance sector. So Carl, over to you. So currently, self-driving vehicles are powertrain agnostic. So what role does the energy infrastructure have in the future of mobility?
Well, I think it would be a great shame if we continue to develop autonomous technology around the internal combustion engine and the current technology that we have today. And we can see that we've got an evolution of the telematics and the connectivity and the LiDAR and everything else that works with autonomous vehicles. And to your plan around 2040 and the ability for us to schedule, communicate, plan, and support our mobility, whether that's in a pod or on a bike or on a Hyperloop or on a drone, perhaps. I think what's really important is that the development and that we see within EV technology today is something that would be beneficial to autonomous drives technology moving forward. So we've less moving parts. We all know that. I think I'm preaching to the choir in this environment today. Less moving parts, so we've got more durability, more resilience in the system. What we need to make sure is that we utilize all of the upcoming technologies, including wireless charging, for example, charging hubs, and the way that we distribute energy and manage that power plants as virtual power plants into autonomous technology as we move forward, so that we can actually move energy, electricity from one part of the grid to the other as we need to as part of an autonomous vehicle.
That's great, Carl. And I think we're really interested to see how that develops, I think, increasingly with sort of charging into grid and things like that. I think it's really interesting challenges coming along. Now, moving swiftly along, I think we've already been hearing a little bit about public transport and the sound of transportation. We're now going to move on to what a vehicle of the future might smell like. So taking this further into the senses, Danielle, your build as a urban smellscape expert. So I think we all want to get a sense of what that's about and what vehicles might smell like in the future. I think we're probably hoping that it will be a change from when the smoking ban came in and we discovered why pubs with carpets is a really bad idea.
I wish I knew the answer. So how does it will smell like? So I guess I can explain what so despite my bio being centered around smell for this event, I haven't added that on my LinkedIn, and possibly I have to do that. So the idea behind Smelly Maps was that we wanted to capture the smell perception and sensory perception more generally of how you feel when you stand on a street. Right? So the question was like, if you stand on a street, can I actually capture the way you feel? The way, whether you see the street to be visually appreciable, what do you smell, what do you hear? So in the case of smell, we sort of said, okay, can we actually build a way through data to capture the entire smellscape of the city? And basically what we did is we capture georeference. How many of you have used Flickr in the past? Right, Instagram, I hope a bit more. Okay, good, fairly a bit more. So basically, these guys, they actually take pictures and they post them, and this picture comes with georeference tags. And so we basically collected for 10 years 10 years worth of geo-reference Flickr tags with pictures, and then we took only the ones that are associated with smell, right? And now all of a sudden, out of these 1 billion different tags that are produced by people just taking pictures, you can actually map the entire smellscape of the city, right? And then there are interesting stuff. For example, if you want to plan a running route, what would you do? So you would avoid traffic, but more interestingly, you would sort of promote nature-based paths for running, right? You avoid nitrogen dioxide, which is a good thing if you run. But also you can actually celebrate the good smell of nature, the energizing one, like mint, and celebrate less the one in natures that are calming, like lavender, because you don't want to be calm when you run, right? So there are these interesting things that once you look at this data that you can do and then profile the smell. Inside the car, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure there are other panelists that would tell you a bit more about how the future of cars will be about adapting to your mood, right? And smell definitely is something very important to your mood and to trigger your memories, right? I'm not sure I answered your question.
I think it's a fascinating topic, and I think it's one of these ones that I think I was desperate to understand a little bit more about what you've been doing, and I think that sounds amazing, and hopefully we'll continue a sort of a sweet-smelling theme of throughout the discussion of the panel. I'll apologize for that later.
We can run all together.
Perfect. Now over to you, Sidro. You've been designing or contributing to the design of vehicles with Mercedes, Audi, Tata, among others. So what do you see as sort of the big changes potentially in vehicle design?
First, from a designer's point of view, our job essentially is to adapt. Being the maker of the end product, we adapt to the engineering challenge. We adapt to the branding value. We have to adapt to different message required us to convey through the product. And clearly, due to the development of autonomous technology in the future, let's say the most important thing in the vehicle design package will probably change radically. Like, for example, the traditionally raw-based passenger layouts would probably change. Not for every vehicle, maybe, but for a lot, no doubt. And this, again, I want to speak from both exterior design and the interior design perspective. On the exterior, I think already in the research vehicles we see from the major brands, for example, Mercedes or Volvo, recently, we can already see this proportional change because of the change of the powertrain, because of the change of the package. And however, I would say as a mean of transportation, the exterior design of the vehicle will always have to convey this message that is going from A to B in a relatively rapid, efficient manner. And this is not only due to this styling product message reason, also due to engineering reasons. But when we talk about the interior, I think we already see more radical changes are being considered by automakers. I would say right now you will see maybe a shift from an industrial machine feeling to a more domestic feeling. I think this is due to the deep reason that the current way of controlling a vehicle by a human, it requires the design of the product to send you a message that you have the control of the power underneath. But in the autonomous future we are imagining now or expecting, this message might not need to be delivered. Of course, depending on the ownership model, we might still require the option to take control of the vehicle for last mile transportation. But I would say the overall message of a vehicle as a product delivered to consumer or to customer will change, and I think it will change towards a feeling of efficiency, comfort, or perhaps more like a facilitating environment for you to conduct your own activities. So I hope this is not too abstract.
No, I think we're sort of getting a sense that there's sort of our living room sort of moves into the car.
Yeah, if you may.
But hopefully without the throw cushions. But I gather from what Danielle's saying that the new car smell is probably going to be with us for decades to come, which is maybe good news for some here. But Julian, over to you. You've got a lot of experience of developing and promoting vehicles, selling vehicles worldwide. So what are your thoughts? What are the changes that you're seeing in the range of vehicles that you've been developing?
Well, certainly there's been a massive change in the range of vehicles we build. I do think there's been an enormous change in the materials and how they're manufactured now. So I think there's a big revolution going on there, which will certainly help towards having a different experience both inside a vehicle and now outside. There's things such as carbon iron batteries that are being made that I think are going to totally transform the power market for these types of vehicles. We're making pods now out of bio composites, so that's hemp and linseed oil, so that they're recyclable. Not that the vehicle smells of hemp, don't get too excited. But I think everything's now going to be a lot more customized, and I can't imagine that it'll count on the hand how many times I've been asked for a party pod, a Prosecco pod, a pod that can take them to sleep in, and all sorts of things. So I think it's definitely going to be, like you say, a more domestic interior, where you're going to either have a living room or an office or a bed for sleeping in, just to make it very clear. And I think that's going to be a big revolution inside the interior design of a vehicle, the infotainment inside a vehicle, but also the materials that we use. Because obviously, the auto industries use a lot of plastic, and there's obviously a lot of work going into changing that because of its environmental impact. And I think that's a big revolution that's going on, led by the public.
Yes, I'm exposed to the world of vegan seat coverings that I've never imagined before, but I guess is now where we're moving into these sorts of considerations for how we use things. So as we now move away from the vehicle for a moment and to start thinking about a bit more about the wider world, thinking more about where the vehicles are going to operate. So if I look over to Richard, if this revolution and how we think about and experience mobility takes the path that it's shaping up to take, what are some of the big changes that you see for urban planning, particularly, and if you could sort of pick on your sort of number one opportunity and then your number one challenge, and then warning to Scott that I'll ask you that very same question, so you're serving notice. So over to you, Richard.
Sure. I think the number one challenge when trying to look forward to how our built and natural environment will look in 5, 10, 100, however many years, is how do we get it right? What key policy drivers can we put in place? And the difficulty of getting those policies quickly and correctly. And I say that having worked in central government, I know how the policy machine can be very difficult to move. And I think it's also worth reflecting. Look, when I first started out in London in my planning career 20 years ago or so, solar power, solar arrays, that was almost unheard of. That is the norm. So what I'd like to see, and I hope to see, is that this becomes the norm, not the exception. And I think turning to opportunities, the sustainability aspect of all of this is key, clearly. But I think also there's some future knock-on opportunities, one being that of surplus land. As the requirement for single car use and the cars we use today decreases, car park land will become available. Large amounts, especially in urban areas. What can that land be put to good use? Housing, surely. Environment, parks. There are lots of opportunities there for the planning system, planning policy to be written to foresee how best that land can be used.
That's great. And then Scott, over to you. Same question, number one challenge, number one opportunity.
Yeah, and for me what's really exciting and fascinating is all this fantastic technological development and innovation happening, and we know it's going to continue happening. It's brilliant and essential for a sustainable future. But we're in danger of just getting loads of stuff and not really knowing why we've got it and what it's for. It's a bit like going into Costco, going to buy one thing and you come out with a trolley full of stuff you didn't even know you needed. So we've got to be a bit careful about jumping 3 or 4 steps ahead and refocus back on what we want as society and about designing great places to live, work, play, and focus on the things that are important, you know, the healthy lifestyle, safety, things like that. So we need to make sure that everything I've done on the smart cities, whatever you can think of, the geniuses can come up with a technology solution that will do it. So the priority is to get things right in terms of the place you want to plan and deliver and live in. Get the things right, and then the technology can fit into it rather than the other way around. And so we must design our places to make sure this technology works, because you can do it the other way around, which is the right way to do it. The other key thing is to understand that it's not for old gits like me, because I won't be here. It's for the generation coming through, for my kids and others. And we need to start talking a lot more to them about what their thinking are. We've already seen, as Richard alluded to, a transition in lifestyle and choice. So there's 25% fewer 16 to 24 males driving cars and travelling less. So the single private car ownership model is moving away. So we need to start thinking about, what does that mean? What are people prioritising? What are they spending their money on? And then develop the technology to create the place that they really want.
Thanks. And I think that ideally, I suppose we might get some more sort of urban gardens and things like that sort of builds the smellscapes that Danielle was talking about. Danielle, you talked a little bit about your Happy Maps work, but what else can informatics do that sort of picks up on both what Richard and Scott have been telling about, sort of this change to urban planning?
Yep. So I mean, the future of mobility is emotions in motion. So the idea is that we will be able to capture how do you feel, whether you feel stress, right? From your wearable, you can already capture from your smartwatch heart rate and heart rate variability, which are good proxies for stress levels, right? And now if these watches actually they become cheap, and they will cost $10, everyone will have it, will have them, and then we can actually do a stress map, collective stress map, and also a personalized stress map, right? A sort of Amazon that is going to recommend you where to go, depending on your personalized stress levels. But in terms of AP Maps, actually, I haven't mentioned it, so maybe I'll mention it quickly. So that project, again, was around the idea is that how do you feel if you stand on a street? And what we did a project where we said, oh, we can quantify whether whether a street segment makes you happy or not. And then we can quantify every other street segments across the city. And what we built for London and Boston was a mapping tool that your Google Maps, if you want to walk from here to Old Street, what is going to do? It's going to give you the shortest path. Whereas our mapping tool will give you the short path that makes you happier. And then all the research went into how can you quantify happiness at the scale of the entire city. And that's basically the idea behind Happy Maps.
That's great. So I'm looking forward to the interplay of these, and I guess by early design, making sure that we can get some of these things working together. I think that advanced planning. So I think actually one of the things, moving on to the next topic, is really about who's part of this future, is the fact that in Zenzik, one of the things, the messages that we find of real traction internationally is the fact that the UK has a real strength in collaboration across sectors, and we've got real strength across these sectors that are becoming so relevant, from insurance and energy infrastructure, vehicle design, manufacture design, and things like that. So there's a really important element there. But Carl, I think what are your views about who the new players might be, sort of less conventional in the future that might be involved in these collaborations?
Yeah, well, I think the first word there is collaboration. I think the struggle for any one industry, one sector, one organisation to be able to plough the way to the future and quickly is not necessarily there. I think it's through the collaborations between partners that can bring lots to the table and be very, very strategic in the way that they're operating. I think the way that we're looking at things, there are two veins, I suppose. There are the stepping stones to what happens next, and then there are the leapfrog technologies. And they offer, or what different partners offer us is those supporting players to the stepping stones or the leapfrog technology. So we can be very forward thinking, but also build our way to it with different sets of partners. There are obviously the big players, the Amazon, the Googles, the Apples, the bits and pieces. These massive organizations are not necessarily doing it on their own, they're doing it in partnership and strategic partnerships. And the way that I think everybody around the panel here has an interest in moving the ball forward. In fact, there may be many partnerships that will be sprouted from this in different areas of making our way to 2040 and supporting the customers, the end users, whether it's a change in business model. For Centrica, perhaps, maybe we start facilitating and supporting subscription ownership of something, but that's not necessarily our traditional business model. Our traditional business model will be energy. But in facilitating in partnerships and multi-way partnerships, that's the way we can move forward.
Thanks, Carl. And then Andreas, same question to you. Are you seeing from your perspective new players coming in, or you're anticipating some changes?
Carl's spot on. I think partnerships are the way forward. We've seen great examples where manufacturers, BMW, Daimler, others have partnered up. Organisations that wouldn't normally be the most comfortable bedfellows are getting into real partnerships together. Not necessarily in the old term of partnerships for a lot of organisations is really a service provider or a retailer or whatever. This is a true co-creation that's needed right now, and it's co-creation of policy and practice in order to get things done. But rather than look at a revolution, you've got to look at the incremental changes to gain adoption through society. Some of the beneficial things to come out of the changes that are going to happen, if you look at future industries, there's service providers, the cleaning's still got to be done of these vehicles. When they stop crashing into people and stop crashing into each other, and accidents stop happening, insurers have to change what they do in order to have a relevance and make people feel safe. And come out of that A to B journey knowing that they're protected in some way. Coach works are going to have a proliferation, they're going to increase. And we're going to get back in the 1800s, there were thousands of coach works around the UK. Every town, every city had coach works that built their own pods that suited the drivetrain that was available at the time. City of London had 50,000 plus horses roaming around, getting rid of whatever comes out the back of a horse. Someone had to clear that up, which they didn't. They had the great manure crisis of 1894, but that's another story. So yeah, it's a catalyst for a lot of change, but partnerships are the solution to avoid chaos.
I used to open with manure when I was doing my early Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles things. The manure crisis, well worth a look for those of you who urban smellscapes. Again, I think we've certainly moved along since some of that.
Funny enough, Tower Bridge was opened on the same day that the manure crisis was. I found that out last night when I walked past it. Same day.
Important reminder: the Department for Transport's located on Horseferry Road, so throwing back to that early time. Why are we asking these questions now? This is one of the things that comes along, is that the fact is that there's a lot of challenges to meet. There's big planning challenges, design challenges, technology challenges, public acceptance is a huge area, and I think we're going to put a flag down as well that what new jobs might be created is something that we might ask out to the audience in a little bit. If some of these technologies, before they really reach sort of proper tipping point saturation in the streets outside, why are we doing the thinking now? Julian, over to you. You seem to spend most of your time traveling from the conversations I've had with you in the past. You're having a lot of discussions in different countries. What are the sorts of things that you're hearing?
I'm hearing lots of things, actually. Mostly it's, the first thing is we want to have some of the technology that the UK's got to offer, which I think is a great starting point. The second thing is that we seem to find that they've copied the code of practice word for word and translated it in a variety of languages. But they have certainly seen the UK as a leader of how government, legal, insurers and manufacturers and partners can work together. And they see that as a great way to do it. And some of them are really struggling to be able to do that same thing in their own countries. There are huge challenges, as there are here. Some of them have got easier challenges. For example, China's building 226 new airports over the next 5 years. But obviously they're building them from scratch and have got plenty of space to be able to do that in. So they are thinking about the future now. Unfortunately, in the UK, we have already very busy built infrastructure that unfortunately we cannot change very easily. So we do have different challenges, but the word on the street is the UK is leading the roost with connected and autonomous vehicles, both with setting the legislation and most importantly that we're operating a safe methodology. So we are starting slowly, we're building up on safety, we're then going out trialling and testing, and the regulations very closely embedded with it, whereas other countries are slightly more lax and allowing people to trial vehicles at high speeds and are then suffering the consequences. So it's an interesting landscape, but what I can tell you is that we're very busy bringing people to the UK and showing them what's happening in the UK, which I think is a fabulous thing, both for sales at the airport as well as showing them the technology and also introducing them to the regulators and how we work together.
Thanks, Julian. And I think actually, so then moving on to you, Sidro, apart from the vehicle, are there other kinds of design opportunities? I for one, sort of wondering if IKEA will come out with a vehicle line, the Billy bookcase in a car or something like that. What sorts of other challenges outside the vehicle are you seeing around for design?
Yeah, I mean, related to the point I raised before, that perhaps the future of autonomous vehicle could become a facilitating environment for you to conduct your own activity, and especially if a vehicle is based on shared ownership model, then I can imagine when the manufacturer designs and engineer the vehicle, why bother to put in technology or functions that everybody wants to use and to own differently? Why not just learn from the ecosystem currently we see on the smartphones? Use the vehicle as a blank sheet of paper, and each owner, when they actually use the vehicle, they can bring in their own product, designed and engineered related to the platform. So I can kind of see this happening. That's imagine like an extended family of products centered around the vehicle. So this is, I think, could be one possible future. Yeah.
It's interesting that tension between customization from I guess micro-manufacture and those sorts of things that are the opportunity, but also the personalization of bringing your own technologies in and doing all that. There's I guess it's all about customer choice, and that seems to be where it's driving towards.
Exactly, because currently we see almost every car manufacturer is trying to put a screen in, put in their own infotainment system. But most time what they get is complaint about how complex they are to use. So, and these hardwares are hard to upgrade. So why not just say you just essentially the interior of the car, just a shelf, and you bring in your own book, you bring in your own belongings, and that's it.
I mean, I think the last word on the sort of panel before we open things up is over to the planning elements. What are the things, again, we're thinking about these technologies as being very future in some of these cases, not seeing a level 5 vehicle perhaps ever, but not for some time will we get to sort of seeing quite a lot of level 4 type vehicles around. But what are some of the planning decisions we need to be making now? You've touched on some of them earlier. This sort of your parting shots. What are the big things we need to do right now?
I think it's planning infrastructure that goes around this particular concept so that when it is rolled out, and it is, as we see coming forward, there is the electric charging points that's required, for example. At the moment, you generally just see a single charging point in a petrol station. Coming this way, London soon, there will be equivalent electric charging stations with much quicker charging times than are the norm at the moment. You're 6-7 hours at home sort of thing. You're looking at 30 minutes, 40 minutes. So it's thinking ahead what infrastructure is required, how that will shape the towns, cities and countryside that we love and cherish. But also on the infrastructure, I think it's important to note that when it comes to the design of the roads, the layouts, that sort of thing, again, that's an important consideration when we're thinking about this subject within a wider context of our towns, cities, and environment.
Thanks, Richard. And you, Scott?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for me is getting those incremental steps right. And you can only do that if you've got, as I mentioned earlier, a long-term vision of what your priorities are and what you want this place to be like when we get there, because the technology can help deliver that. So, for example, cleaner air. We know that technology can help deliver cleaner air through electric or other ultra-low emission vehicles. So we know the technology can help. We need to plan for that, and that means electric charging points, that means other things. But there are other layers to this around the place and the ambience. You know, when I walked here today, it happened to be a fire engine that came out of the fire station, nearly burst my eardrums. But with connected autonomous vehicles, you won't need the sirens. You'll need a much quieter siren for people who are walking around. But for the vehicles, they'll know there's an emergency vehicle coming, no siren. So things like the noises, the smells, the sounds, the ambience, the walking around. If we can start planning the places now and say this technology can really help us solve this here, and therefore we're going to move in this incremental step towards it. And then you get those people who live and work there to buy into it. So we're not imposing a solution on them and say, look, we know best, this is what you need. We're doing it in phases, and we're saying, this is your vision, you said these are the important things for you, and this is how the technology is going to enable it. And then we can build those incremental steps into the planning system and into the town planning and design process.
And I think it's interesting what you're saying about emergency vehicles toning down their sound, whereas actually now we're talking about electric vehicles having a sound imposed on them, and introducing the idea that maybe there's going to be this dystopian future where the ringtone generation we had with mobile phone telephony will now apply to cars, where people can have their Star Trek sound or who knows what put onto their vehicle. But I can't let your mention of vision of what the infrastructure should look like pass without a side mention of some work that Zenzik's doing with SMLL and other colleagues here around a roadmap out to 2030, which is bringing together the societal, the infrastructure, the vehicle technologies, and the services element, and really looking at, and then sort of golden threads across those around safety, cybersecurity, and all these sorts of things. So there's more to come on that. There's a lot of contributions from many of you here in the room, but I think we'll wind up our sort of formal panel part on that note, but I think it's now time to move over to you, the audience. So I think you've been listening to a very rich array of sensory experiences and ideas. I hope that's stimulated your imagination. So I think we're going to move over to you for some thoughts. So as a starter for that, I carry around on my phone a photograph of a 1910 photograph taken in India of a family in a 1908 Phoenix quad car. And I use that as a reminder of the changes in technology in the past 100 years to the vehicle, but also to the infrastructure and also the societal uses. Because also these vehicles are deeply personal, and their uses of mobility are deeply personal. In this case, this photograph is of my great-grandfather and my grandfather. Pass over the fact that my great-grandfather was a colonial government opium agent, but it does talk about the fact that in that lifetime there's been this huge change. So I think the question out to the audience is, when your grandchildren, great-grandchildren are looking at photographs of vehicle technology from now, what's going to strike them as the biggest change? Like trying to explain to my children what rewind meant. We call it fast backward now, because it's ludicrous, obviously, anything you might have to rewind. So what are the big challenges that they might see in 50, 60 years' time? Longer. Oh, we've got a taker.
Hi there, I'm Dan Phillips from the Royal College of Art, and we work with a few of you guys on the Gateway project. So a couple of questions about these futures. Do you think the future of cities is going to be dominated by public transport or private transport? And do you think the future of cities is going to be fast or slow?
Right, should we go any take a step, Julian, Ivan?
Sorry, it's Julian from Westfield. We probably have quite a big view on the fact that I think we've already seen a big shift in automotive to the aviation business model, whereby manufacturers are obviously manufacturing the vehicles and then they're providing them over to operators. So I think that the operators may well be taking a big chunk of this market and operating all those vehicles on behalf of the manufacturers and also on behalf of the users. There's already a shift of that happening, especially where we're working, but I think that is a business model that we know works and may possibly be that way. In terms of your second question, I think it's going to be fast moving. The digitization of the airspace is already happening. So I think we're going to see things go into the air, which I think is going to speed up because you don't have to deal with cats, dogs, bushes, sunlight moving around, obstacles, children hiding behind corners. So I think there's going to be a big shift to putting things into the air and then bringing them down to the ground in certain hub areas and then distributing. It's a distribution network, really, is what I think the future is going to look like, from my perspective, anyway.
Right. Scott?
Yeah, I think it's not so much public-private transport, it's the fact to make our big cities work, we've got to have more shared transport, and the blurring of lines between public and private is going to become more familiar to us. If you simply look at the number of people that live and work there, to move that many people needs those vehicles to be efficient and to be full of people, not small metal boxes with one person in trying to get from A to B. It just logistically doesn't work with the space we've got in our Western economy. So it's got to be about shared transport, and the best way to deliver that through the technology and the way lifestyle and choice is changing as we go into the future. So however the model plays out, because it will evolve and change, the sharing economy is fundamental, and of course the technology and the data out there and the analysis of that data is fundamental to that. So that will enable it. In terms of the speed, that's the only way to achieve the speed, because we're all demanding more and more. I'm old enough to remember the fax machine. Business used to be great, but then the fax machine got invented and they wanted the answer now. Now we're in a world where everyone wants the answer. So as technology evolves and advances, we tend not to slow down. We tend to accelerate to the pace of the technology. So it enables us to work faster, to deliver things faster, and then we as society demand it. So inevitably things are going to happen faster unless we all collectively say, hold on, we want to slow our cities down and change the way we live.
I think also there's an element in terms of buyer behaviour and the purchase propensity for owning your own car. I think we've already seen the rates of people applying for a driving licence is dropping dramatically. So they're obviously moving from A to B in a more sustainable way than owning a vehicle, more cost effective, less carbon, and I'm sure that my children won't be owning cars by the time they're old enough to have a licence. So I think we can see that generational shift, and we talk about the next generations and the way that they're looking to own things today. Again, second time I mentioned subscription ownership, but these fractional ownership and subscription models are something which is becoming more and more prevalent in the automotive industry.
Right, other questions out there at the moment? Oh, there's one just there, and then there's another question at the back. So this gentleman here, and then.
When I look back at the last shift to mobility, it was around 1900 when Ford developed his mass production techniques, and it became predictable that automotive adoption was there for the masses. As a consequence of that, there was a whole things that we didn't predict, like the change of the urban landscape, the out-of-town shopping mall, right? And that changed the nature of cities. And that wasn't so predictable. With this new shift to mobility, what things we probably not thinking about, which are obvious, do you think may change in that urban landscape now?
And maybe, Richard, do you want to touch on that?
I think that it's about trying to future-proof design and think forward. We have more flexible spaces, more flexible structures, buildings. Slight comparison, where I live in Shepherd's Bush, the 1960s W12 shopping centre, huge acres of car parking, never full. There is a use being put to that now. It's for car hire companies. So that's a small evolution. It's not quite got to where we're talking about now, but that's that part of a design evolving to meet a particular need. And I go back to, I think, what I said in my first response. It's also about ensuring that we have the right policy to taint us, to push us in the right direction. And I'm not just talking about national policies, at a local level, communities understanding how they can look forward to how their villages, towns, environment is going to look 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time.
And Andreas?
Yeah, I think there's something that we overlook, which is, what do people actually want? Where do they want to live and where do they want to work? And sometimes they're two very, very different things. So some people may want to live in much more rural environments, but they want to work in a city centre because they like the vibe of that city centre. But in order to do that efficiently and effectively for themselves, they need to get there and back really quickly. So this is where the distribution nodes and those kind of theories come into play. So, that's just moving humans. We haven't talked about logistics and moving goods and services, and that's a whole different matter. Where these hubs are located is going to either cause disruption or cause a whole load of employment and happiness. So we've got to start weighing up these scenarios and painting them in as honest a picture as we can, and lay them out not just to the geeks and the experts and so forth, but to the public, and help them make I hate to say the word democratic choice.
So I think there's I've got time for one last question. I think there is towards the build. Yes, thank you.
So you were talking about scenarios for the future, and you talked about the great manure crisis of 18, what happened. Well, if we scroll forward 20 years and Facebook has crashed again, all our bitcoins have disappeared, there's an enormous tech backlash, there's a populist movement led by Nigella Farage, who wants us to take back control of our data so we don't want to be connected. And there's a whole Luddite movement starting, which is going to threaten the connected, autonomous, wonderful world, because cars in cities are broken, doesn't work, we can't get around. And yet we live in an era right now where vinyl record sales are going up. So, people are odd, we're contradictory, we like to do binary things. I'm a cycling, public transport, tree-hugging petrol head. So we all do things that don't look so good in architectural models, they don't fit with futurescapes. How do you anticipate that sort of outlier black swan event where we decide, no, we don't want to be a unit in a pod being controlled by Uber?
All right, so first rule of technology is that people are going to use it in ways that they shouldn't be using it. Who wants to pick up that grenade?
Can I just say that vinyl's really expensive now? And if you are going to focus on vinyl and look at those, I wouldn't call it niche, but you're absolutely right. There is that choice element, and if we're looking at that 2040 scenario where, say, 15% of the people want to make absolutely that choice of driving their own car in their own way around their own corners and stopping in the way they like, then that's a very that's almost a specialised area, and that requires its own servicing and legislation and rules and all sorts of other things that come with it. But I completely agree. I'm very pro-choice in that matter. But I think those guys over there need to be allowed to ride their bikes as well in the future. That's another issue. We've been talking about four wheels predominantly, but there's a proliferation of two-wheel electric vehicles hitting the market, and micro-mobility and all sorts of other ways of getting about. So there will be other distractions and things that people enjoy over the next 10 years that we'll have to retain in the next 40 years.
Danielle, the tension between privacy and access to data?
I don't know. I don't know if I buy this apocalyptic scenario. Because, for example, if you look at the death rates from the 16th century to nowadays, you have a curve that goes like that, right? And everybody thinks, oh, the world is becoming more violent. In reality, it's becoming more peaceful by the day, right? If you're interested in that, Steven Pinker has written a fantastic book about that. He's a professor at Harvard University. In terms of privacy, you can see already, so we are humans, we are adaptable. So Facebook thought that behavioral advertising was the future. It might not be the future because people are pushing back. You have GDPR and you have some changing norms around privacy. You can see even among young people, they don't use Facebook anymore. Snapchat is all about fading content that disappears. You cannot do behavioral advertising. So I think we are gonna, by looking at this like very tiny window of time, we are gonna design a future that is gonna be very, very different than this far west of behavioral advertising that is on the internet nowadays. So I'm quite positive about the future.
I think it's always good to end on a positive note. So I know we're slightly over time, but not horrendously over time. So I think I'll wind things up. I'd like to thank panel for their time and their thoughts across the at least 5 of the senses and delving into the 6th sense, obviously, with their ESP, looking at the crystal ball. And thank you also for your questions. And I'm sure we'll have continue that rich discussion after the break. Thanks very much.